Welcome into this special episode of Three True Values. I'm your host, James Fletcher. We've got Derek Lewis from On Three joining us today as we're going to go through a first round mock draft. We've got just a couple weeks left until we start seeing names come off the board. So felt like it was time to do a full show dedicated to the picks that could happen. So we're going to go back and forth. I will start. I will have the number 1 pick. Derek will have the number 2 pick, and then we will alternate down through pick 30. If you want more second round analysis, I'll probably do a little bit more of that next week, but sometimes it gets hard to do these mock drafts beyond pick 30. So we're going to go back and forth. No plans for a trade. We'll see if one materializes throughout the show, though. And we will be bringing up the screen share here so that you guys can see as we go what is happening through the Fanspo setup, which is just a great setup for these mock drafts like we are doing now. So as we get into it, I don't think there's much of a debate here. I think the number 1 pick has to go Cooper Flagg to the Dallas Mavericks. Not much anticipation here. It's not quite the Victor Wembanyama to the Spurs where we knew months, even years in advance who was going to go at the top, but throughout the college basketball season, Cooper Flagg really did separate himself. And the Mavericks, I think, are the bigger story to talk about with this first pick because, I mean, look, it's they got bailed out. They got bailed out. Derek, I know you're a fan of a team in that division, as am I, growing up. So what was your reaction when the Mavericks got the number 1 pick, even when your team got the number 2 pick?
See, it's weird. It's weird for me because I actually, as you know, have been a small Nico defender. I think he gets a little too, I think it got a little too hot. It got a little too crazy. And so I was rooting for chaos. Even when it was possible that the Spurs could still get the number 1 pick, I was still kind of like, but wouldn't it be funny if the Mavs got the pick though? And then even when I knew that the Spurs were going to get at least 2 or 1, I was like, all right, this is good enough. Let's not get greedy. I have Victor Wembanyama on my favorite team. And so I actually didn't have what I think would be the typical in division reaction. And to be honest, like I know this is kind of weird to say, but Cooper Flagg doesn't scare me enough. Like if it was Wimby, I would have been livid. But Cooper Flagg is scary. Don't get me wrong; he's one of the best prospects in a while, but he's not so scary that I was like, I'm mad that the Spurs have the number 2 pick and not the number 1 pick.
Yeah, Cooper Flagg, he is great. Victor Wembanyama, having him though, it makes it hard to be scared of anyone in the NBA right now with his development track and what they've got building there. But now we move on to the number 2 pick where you are on the board. Will you be going the typical route or are you going to mix it up here for us?
The Spurs are announcing a trade. No, I'm just kidding. The Spurs are going to Spurs are going to take Dylan Harper, and so am I. I'm also going to take Dylan Harper. Uh, I know that there is the quote unquote fit concerns.
Mm-hmm.
Watch the Indiana Pacers, watch the Oklahoma City Thunder. 3 guard lineups are all the vogue right now. And the Spurs, you can't, everyone is enamored with Stephen Castle, and I am as well. I think he's going to be a great player, but there are still some limitations that you have to work through, in terms of shooting, in terms of just in terms of shooting, really.
Mm-hmm.
And that could make for an awkward fit. That might mean something down the line if he doesn't develop like you think he could. Now, the Spurs shouldn't worry about that now. They should just develop him. But just in case, you should always have backup plans. And if your backup plan is one of the best guard prospects since Cade Cunningham, I think you're doing okay. I'm a big believer in always go best available unless you are 1 piece away from the title. Maybe then I could see fit concerns. The Spurs are not 1 piece away from the title,
Right.
so keep it simple. You go Dylan Harper.
Yeah, I think that Cade Cunningham is the kind of comparison that I've thrown around just a little bit. I think he might be just a little bit behind Cade Cunningham as a prospect, but it's in that same range. It's that same type of prospect, especially with that size. And so I like what you're saying there of, yes, there are fit concerns, but the championship window, if it's open, you're in the first little crack of the door where you're starting to see light. You're not in the wide open window here. And so if a year, 2 years down the line, things just aren't working, then you've got 3 different archetypes of point guards that you can move any of those 3. And, somebody around the league is going to want whatever one of those archetypes you're willing to give up. So I think it is a good play there for the Spurs. Now, we get to the 76ers at number 3, and I think one of the really interesting things that's come up, I actually just saw before we started recording this morning, there's a report out there by Michael Scotto that the 76ers have called the Spurs about the number 2 pick, which makes me very interested. Do they want Dylan Harper? Because that's an interesting move for them to make up the board, because they've also got multiple point guards on the roster. You look at Tyrese Maxey and Jared McCain, and so there was a previous thought that maybe VJ Edgecombe was not the perfect fit because they already had guards. Well, if they're looking to move up the board, they clearly don't have the same concerns. Or, I don't know, maybe they're concerned that the Spurs are going to go a different direction at number 2. But with how much the consensus has led towards Dylan Harper, I've got to think that the guard position is not a concern for them. They think they can run that 3 guard lineup as well. So I am going with VJ Edgecombe here. I think it's the pretty clear pick if you're looking for the player up at the top here. As we look at Ace Bailey, VJ Edgecombe, Trey Johnson, that's kind of the core here. You can bring Common Malawak, I think, into the conversation as well. But with Joel Embiid, I'm not sure how much you want to do that unless you want to run the Twin Towers model. I think that having a 3 guard lineup here, VJ Edgecombe is the most ready to help you make a playoff push of any of those players that we mentioned, between Bailey, Johnson, and Malawak. He's got the defense that's going to immediately translate. He's got the length to guard on the perimeter. And so I don't have as many concerns as I would some smaller guards, as I do having VJ Edgecombe play with that duo.
Now, you talk about the report earlier. What do you think the 76ers would have to give up to move to 2? Because you'd have to feel like it's a king's ransom. I don't know if the 76ers have ransom to pay
Right.
based on the moves that they've made.
That is the interesting part of that conversation, is that usually you talk about moving up one spot on the board. You think maybe it's a future pick down the road, potentially it's just a rotation player, something like that. If you're just looking to move up one spot on the board, but there is a very clear, very defined tier break from just about everyone I know who is in the draft sphere. They all say that tier 1 is Cooper Flag, tier 2 is Dylan Harper, and then the rest kind of file into tier 3. So I do think it could be a significant offer that would be needed, whether that's one of their top end rotation players or one valuable pick down the road, or even multiple picks down the road that would have to be in play for them to get from number 3 to number 2 if they really want Dylan Harper that badly. But now we move on to pick number 4, where you're on the board with the Charlotte Hornets, and I'll just say this: good luck.
Yeah, man. When you gave me the evens, I didn't realize I was going to have the Hornets and I was going to have to think so very hard. Even just looking at the board, because it's like technically the Hornets need everything, but technically they need nothing. It's like they're one of
Yeah,
those teams. We talked about this last year a little bit, where it's like they technically have all these positions filled, but they're still bad.
yeah.
So uh, I think I'm gonna do the very Hornetsy thing and just bet on upside. Not bet on my culture because it's never worked, but I'm still apparently betting on culture. I'm gonna take Ace Bailey and hope it all works out in the end. I know that there's concerns with his mentality, with even his creation, because he takes a lot of tough shots. Is he going to be able to make those tough shots in the NBA? The motor concerns, the mentality concerns. I'm not sure this is a great fit for Charlotte, but I just can't bring myself to take another guard for them,
Mhm.
unless they're going to trade LaMelo Ball, which they don't necessarily need to do that to take another guard, but it's still, it would feel like it's starting to get cramped. Um, I know I just said that right after saying that the Spurs can take Dylan Harper and do whatever they want. So it's kind of like, but it's Charlotte, so you got to be different.
Yeah, well,
Anyway,
one is working. One of them is not.
yes. So we're gonna go Ace Bailey and pray for rain, pray it all works out. It's the Hornets, so unfortunately, although I think that fan base is great, it doesn't seem to work out for them. But that's what we're going with. Bet on upside, bet on development. At least they have some adults in the room now, in terms of staff, as opposed to what they've
Hmm.
been doing before. So
Yeah,
we'll
I think
see.
I think Charles Lee brought there, of course, to bring culture. Year one, it didn't really work, and I'm not saying it's never going to work with that group of players. We could see it click. It could come, but they brought in some guys who they thought were going to just be solid role players who would kind of stabilize the group of young talent that they had, and it did not work. All of the role players pretty much went downhill in their production from their career standards. And then you end up with LaMelo Ball not healthy at all during the year, Brandon Miller not healthy, a debacle of a Mark Williams trade. And it felt like they even slid further backwards from where they were previously. Of course, Miles Bridges still on that roster after all the off court things that he has done. That can't help the culture or the ability to create culture, even for a coach that's trying to send a certain message about the standards that need to be upheld. So taking Ace Bailey here, I think who I feel the worst for if this is the scenario that plays out is Ace Bailey, because I think he needs to be somewhere in the league that he can get that structure, he can get that early understanding of how to work, how to play in the NBA. Because yes, you mentioned the mentality stuff that has come up in the pre-draft process. Obviously, he gave some answers at the combine that rubbed some people the wrong way. And I like there's a fine line here of the confident player and then the player who is a little bit overly confident, which is fine. There are plenty of players in the NBA who are way overconfident for what they are. But when the overconfidence stems from the same area that is the primary concern on whether or not you can become a star, it really severely limits my ability to bet on your upside. But Ace Bailey has an incredible upside here. So it is a pick that still makes sense. Now you see that 6'10 figure there. We found out that's not true. He's actually
Well,
6'8. And
I
that's a
was gonna
big
say
play in this too.
that's the real. He could be as confident as he wanted if he was still 6'10". I think.
Right.
Like there are things we'll let you get away with if you're actually 6'10". When we found out he wasn't, then it was like, oh, some of these concerns are actually a lot bigger now that you're not bigger.
Yeah. And to that point, I heard someone bring this up the other day, and I thought it was pretty funny and kind of a fitting thing here. Ace Bailey went the opposite direction of Giannis Antetokounmpo. If you remember when Giannis was drafted, he was like 6'7", 6'8", and he shows up and everyone's like, "Oh, he's still growing. He's still growing." Well, 6'8" Giannis was like a role player on a bad Bucks team and was figuring things out. 6'11" Giannis is one of the greatest players of all time.
Correct.
Now with Ace Bailey, we went the
It,
opposite way. We thought he was 6'10" Ace Bailey, and now he's 6'8" Ace Bailey.
and
How does
sometimes
that?
it really is that simple in the NBA. Is
Yes.
the 2 inches make all the difference? It can really just be that simple.
Yep. It is a game where we're playing with giants. So that matters a lot out there on the
One
court. Now we get to,
one last thing before you move
yeah,
on is I will say this for that pick for Charlotte is the defensive versatility would be off the charts between Brandon Miller, Miles Bridges, and now Ace Bailey. Even though he is shorter than we think, that would be some amazing versatility with your forward spot.
yeah, that's for sure. Now we get to number 5, and this is one where I have gone back and forth a lot in my mock draft on what I think that the Utah Jazz should do because I think that they desperately, desperately need a point guard. But I also think that Trey Johnson, while he is not a point guard per se, is on the ball quite a bit. And for a team that does not use the word point guard, the Utah Jazz are very specific. They talk about lead guards. They do not use the term point guard. And so there is not this commitment that some other teams have to. We have to get a point guard in place who is going to run the offense like a traditional pass first option. Now, obviously, point guards don't have to be pass first, especially in today's NBA. But this is a team that has gone out of their way to use new terms avoiding point guard. So while there has been links to Jeremiah Fears, there has been talk about the Utah Jazz as a fit for him. I have him well further down my board, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when he is picked. But for those reasons, I'm going with Trey Johnson, who is the number 3 player on my board. I think if you can get value in terms of where in the draft you're getting him, and also get a guy who I think positionally can have the ball in his hand for the majority of time, especially with another combo guard next to him. I think between the two of them, they can split up the ball handling duties, and he would do just fine there in Utah, somewhere where they need someone to be the go-to scoring option. That's I think their two biggest needs: point guard and somebody to just be the consistent force on offense. I think Trey Johnson provides that for them, and so I'm going to go with him here. You've seen quite a bit of Trey Johnson. Do you like either this fit or this position on the board for him?
Yeah, if there's two things me and you agree on, it's Jeremiah Fears and it's Trey Johnson. And uh for lack of a better term, I think that Danny Ainge is going to come in and he's going to use Trey Johnson in that white man role, which is to send him off just a ton of screens. Just take that man, loop him around Ray Allen styles, the Boston connection. So that's not a white man, but you know what I mean. Ray Allen looping around them screens, sending all sorts of havoc. I think Will Hardy would be able to use him that way. I actually I'm not saying I disagree that they need a quote unquote lead guard with you, but I actually think they need this archetype even a little bit more, especially because they do have Keontae George. I think he's developing fine. We'll see how that continues to work, but I still believe in that process for now.
Mhm.
So I think Trey Johnson is actually really good value here. I agree with your board that he is the third best player in the draft, in my opinion. I think he's a little underrated. And it's starting to we're starting to see that play out in the draft process to a certain extent. I don't think that's necessarily going to move him that far up the board, but we are seeing people starting to fall in love with Trey Johnson because he's just a gym rat,
Yeah.
and he just loves ball. And he's willing to do pretty much whatever you ask him to do because he loves ball. I know people had concerns with Rodney Terry's coaching, but one thing he got right was coaching Trey Johnson up, and he improved throughout the season. And he put him in a lot of different situations. Whether you believe he should have been in those situations, he was in a lot of different ones, and he proved that he was willing to do whatever it takes or whatever his coach asked if it was in the name of winning.
Yeah. On the mentality of Trey Johnson, as we wrap up here with the fifth pick, this is a guy who started moving up my board. I was a little bit low on him just because he was a volume scoring guard coming out of high school. But when I started to flip on him and started to go, okay, no, I'm moving this kid up my board. And he eventually, I think at one point, I was one of the earliest people to have him in that third, fourth slot on the draft board. It all started at SEC Media Days when I asked Trey Johnson about the fact that Rodney Terry had dropped Kevin Durant's name in his dialogue, in his monologue, excuse me, about the freshman guard. And he took it straight on. He said, yes, I want to be like Kevin Durant. I want to be one of the greatest Texas players of all time. I want to go be one of the greatest NBA players of all time. It was that mentality. Um, we just talked about it with Ace Bailey, kind of the other side of it. There is the confidence that is based in I am going to work so hard to get there. And then there's sometimes the confidence of, hey, I am this. Don't question how I work. And there's a slight just difference there that's hard to pick up sometimes, but if you really pay attention, it's there in prospects from the top of the board all the way down through the bottom. I mean, I think it's almost more important at the bottom of the board. If you're going to be a role player in the NBA, you've got to be somebody who's willing to just grind in a gym for month after month after month with no guarantee of ever being on the court. So that
He
is
says
something that
he
Trey
says
Johnson
right
has.
after he says right after the TJ McConnell game.
Right. Exactly. And so there's all kinds of those players across the NBA. But now we move on to number 6, where the Washington Wizards, another team that needs just about everything.
Oh, the Wizards. All right, I'm gonna do something that I think every Spurs fan is going to clap about, even though none of those Spurs fans will ever hear this. At least the ones that I'm referring to. And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna take Con Knuckles for the Washington Wizards. Um, I think they need someone. They need more adults in the room. And ironically, even though this is a child, he is gonna be in Washington. He's gonna come in. He's gonna be an adult in the room. He just does everything you need to do on a basketball court. I'm a little bit more leery than I think some are about his defensive abilities when he has to take it to the NBA level. I know he's bigger, but I still think the way that he plays defense, there are some things that I am worried about. But he's going to work hard enough to, I think, overcome those deficiencies and at bare minimum be a 15-year role player. Hopefully the Wizards are smart enough to have him be a 15-year role player with him. The ceiling might not be as high. I know some think the ceiling is high. I'm not as big on his ceiling, but the floor is the floor is so high that I think this is a tremendous pick. Fits around Sar, can shoot. Again, just provides all the things that Washington needs right now. And again, an adult in the room, even though he's literally not an adult.
Yeah, I agree with you there on the idea that he is a high floor prospect, and that's what's gotten him so far up in this conversation. Is that you look at some of these people and you're like, I can see them being a star, but what is the percentage chance that they turn into that? Versus what is the percentage chance that they struggle to contribute in the NBA? Well, with Nipple, it's as close to 100% as you're going to get for a draft prospect that he is going to contribute at the NBA level. I don't have massive concerns about his defense because I never think he's going to be asked to guard one on one in space against some of the best teams players in the league. I think he's a good team defender. He knows where he's supposed to rotate on the floor. He gets there quick enough, good positioning when he's out there, and he's a bigger body. Obviously 6'7", but he's thick in the places you need to be thick so that he can stand up against somebody who is driving into his chest, against somebody if he has to rotate down into the post. He can stand there and he's not just going to get knocked backwards. There's plenty of players, especially his age, especially in this draft class, that you have some of those concerns about. Are they just going to get pushed off the spot? Are they too thin, especially up top, to handle that? You don't have those questions about him, and so he comes in immediately, is a role player, and yes, I think this Wizards team can definitely benefit from someone like him. Just a solid, consistent presence. So now at number 7, we've got the New Orleans Pelicans, who have a lot of options that they can kind of break down, look through this offseason. They have a new front office coming in, which obviously leads everyone to speculate on who will or will not continue on this roster, especially a roster that has been pretty dysfunctional over the past couple of years. Yes, they had extreme injury setbacks this past season, but the year before that, it was a little bit underwhelming. The year before that, it was a little bit underwhelming. And you've just kind of been waiting and waiting for this team to have some kind of breakthrough, and it has not really happened, despite some moves on both ends of the roster trying to get it there. And so when I look at this team, when I look at what they should be doing, if you're going to stick with Zion Williamson, I think that having a big who can stretch the floor a little bit more is extremely valuable. That's why I'm going with Common Malawak here. I know that they took Eve Missy in the top in the lottery last year, but they really don't have much else on the roster at the center position. I think it's Kelly Olynyk on an expiring contract, somebody who, if they are going to move pieces around and try to improve in this offseason, is a prime candidate to be part of trades. So take Common Malawak. You get kind of your dynamic duo. You can play Eve Missy, who is a rim runner, Common Malawak, a little bit more pick and pop potential, I will say. A lot of people will tell you, oh, he's a shooter, he's a shooter. We didn't really see it at Duke. And so it's something that he has left to prove. Now, not shooting in college does not necessarily mean that you're not going to be a great NBA shooter. I mean, just look at Karl Anthony Towns. Barely stood on the perimeter at Kentucky and now is one of the greatest perimeter big men in NBA history. So with Common Malawak, he brings a little bit something different, a change of pace from Eve Missy, but not so much that I think that you cannot have the two of them on the roster. So I am really interested in having that duo at the center position. You kind of lock that up. You make sure that, hey, we are set at the big man position, and give yourself some options depending on who else is on the floor. As we know, this team continues to sort through what the rest of the roster looks like. I think they'll do a lot of that through trade, though.
Yeah, you say that, and me and my friends were kind of talking about this before. It's just if it ever went back out of style, the two bigs is back in style. And so
Mm-hmm.
when you made this pick, I kind of made a couple of faces because it's not something that I naturally think about for the Pelicans. But when you explain it, you definitely won me over to the idea, and this is, I think, where you as a draft expert come into play with some projection, because it's hard for me to envision Malawach as a shooter because I've not seen him do it. And I know that there's some idea with his development that he could get there because he's still very young in his
Mm-hmm.
development. But it's a lot harder for me to project, where it might be a little bit easier for me to project. But yeah, this was a pick I wasn't thinking about for the Pelicans, but I like it. I like it, Fletch. You're
Yeah,
doing the Lord's work.
I think you get into this tier and you start to look at tier breaks and you start to wonder like how many players are still available on the board who we have at this certain threshold. And you really don't want to dip below a tier break, especially picking this high up in the draft. And so, is it the best positional fit? Maybe not. I think Trey Johnson would be the home run. Like, if he falls to 7, no way
Oh yeah,
that he gets
lock it
past the
up.
Pelicans. But in the absence of him on this board, when I look at the rest of the players available, Malawak is probably the highest rated that I've got. And so, particularly with their positional needs, I think he's a good fit here. As we move on to number 8, where the Nets get their first of many, many picks in this first round.
Oh, the Nets. Why do I keep getting the teams that like have things, but then their things are weird? And so, like, are they going to move those things for other things? And at this point, I'm just going to bet on the upside and take Kasparis. And I'm not going to even attempt to do the last name because last year,
Yakachonis.
thank you.
Yakachonis
Do it
is his last
for me.
name.
That's what you're here for to do it
Yes.
for me.
Now,
Because
this is
last
interesting. You mentioned the Nets pick and how you get stuck with them. Well, you're going to pick for them one more time later in this mock. I'm going to pick for them two times later in this mock. So we both get to split up the Brooklyn Nets. We're going to combine forces, give them almost an entire starting five for
yeah, so
next season.
we're gonna give them a whole new roster. Apparently, I
Yes,
didn't as much as I knew that I didn't think of that. That's
right.
so many picks. They're obviously going to probably not obviously, but one would think they consolidate some of those resources. Usually, teams do not bring in that many
Mhm.
young people at once, but they are going to bring this guy in because he has a lot of tools. And
He
what
does. He's a guy who can. I mean, you talk about dribble, pass, shoot. You talk about the ability to impact the box score in multiple areas. Just look at his stats there on the screen. He got downhill. He could score. A great passer. He contributed on the boards a lot more than I anticipated him at Illinois. I thought he was a really strong rebounder from the guard position. Now, the issue with Kasparis, the reason that he has kind of slipped a little bit down some of boards, depending on who you talk to, is well, he turns the ball over. And he's not the only guard in this class who turns the ball over, but it was a pretty high rate considering what he did. There were some inefficiency problems, but I do really like his upside. I do really like the trajectory of where he's going as a player. And so now we move to the Toronto Raptors, and this is another one where it gets a little bit difficult to try to figure out where to go with them. But I think where I'm going to land, because we know that they are, through reports, they're looking to swing some trades. They're looking to do something here, trying to add to the top end of this roster. Now, if you add to the top end of the roster, you are inevitably going to have to give up some of your depth. And so I think they replace some of that depth with Carter Bryant from Arizona, who is one of the most NBA ready players that we have in this class. And that's something that you maybe didn't think you were going to say about halfway through the year, maybe even a little bit more at Arizona. Because if you look at his stats there, didn't put up incredible stats. But what he did is he filled a role. And that is a rare thing to see from a 5-star prospect coming into a blue blood program like Arizona. And so, what I really like about Carter Bryant is that not only did he accept that he was not going to be the number one option, that he wasn't going to be counted on to score 15 points a game for Arizona, he embraced everything he was asked to do. He became an excellent defender on the perimeter. He contributed on the boards. He worked to become a great spacer, to understand all of the little areas of the game that are going to benefit him throughout his entire basketball career, where
yeah.
he is unlikely to be the number one go to option again. I thought he did an excellent job at Arizona. I was extremely impressed by it, and it moved him up my board without increased production, which is something that's very interesting. You don't see it that often, but it did happen in this case.
Well, two quick things. He didn't just. It's not that he just filled a role, and you explained this afterwards, but he filled a role that's scalable. That
Mhm.
scales up to the NBA. He can fill that exact same role in the
Yes.
NBA, and it's useful. And then we also know that Toronto, the Raptors love this archetype of player. So definitely makes sense for what they like to do. Pretty much what any team likes to do, but especially the Raptors.
Yeah. And now we move to the number 10 pick, where the Houston Rockets somehow are in the lottery.
Why are you here? Why are you here? I honestly, and I'm just be very real. I have no clue. Houston might not even make this pick, because,
Yeah, there is a decent chance that they're going to look to move it for some veteran help for sure.
but I am going to do a very Rocketsy thing and give them another rangy forward with shooting upside, and so we're gonna go Asanul. That's what we'll do.
All right. It's a
Uh,
Newell here
I,
going
I
off the
think
board at number 10.
I think it's possible that someone trades up and maybe bets on like the Jeremiah Fears upside. I can't
Hmm.
have the Rockets do that because my God, they have
Right.
Reed Shepard who they couldn't play. Why would they take Jeremiah Fears? I thought about Derek Queen, but it's just like I don't love that fit, especially if they're going to keep Sengun. But if they trade Sengun and they still have this pick, maybe they do take Derek Queen. So it's
Yeah.
the Rockets have so much roster flexibility. It's very hard to project what they would do with this pick. But because they are the Rockets and because they are Ime Udoka, I'm going to go with the archetype that they like, and Austin Newell is that archetype. A player who can bang, who can defend, who can switch. He's switchable, and then has some shooting upside. Though there are question marks with that, but at this point in the draft, you're kind of taking everyone and their warts and all, and hoping that they actually fulfill the projection that they can get the higher end of their projection.
Yeah, Newell is definitely an upside swing here. He is a guy who early in his career is going to be a dunker spot player. And I think that the Rockets have the position for him on the floor if they want to use him that way. So I do think it's an interesting fit here. It would be a change of pace when Alperen Şengün is not on the floor. Of course, whoever they pick here at 10 is likely not going to be asked to play large minutes. They're probably going to have a long runway here to learn what the system is, to kind of be on the bench, to work in practice with some of the other players and fill out their game. So I like this. You're projecting potentially he could become a shooter. He is very fascinating to me because he is clearly a power forward. He is not a center, but he's 6'11", and he's got all of the kind of tools to protect the rim, to get into passing lanes. Like you said, he can switch up to a three if he needs to in certain situations. There is a lot to like. It's just putting it all together. It's trying to figure out, can he take all of the good parts of his game and make those the focus, the focal point of what he does. So Asa Newell, a little bit lower on my board than this, but I like your rationale there. I do think that that's the type of thing that could happen with this pick. And now we get to the Portland Trailblazers, where I really love what I'm about to get to do. I had two names, and I was going to pick whichever one was available here once we got through that last pick. But I have to go Colin Murray Boyles. I have been high on him throughout this entire process. He is one of the most switchable, versatile defenders. He can guard anywhere 3 through 5 solidly. I think if he gets left on an island with a shooting guard, it depends on what shooting guard. Obviously, the NBA has some incredible uh, playmakers at that position, but I think that he can switch just all over the court. He is so strong in the paint, and he was the offensive engine for for the South Carolina team that he led. I saw really good growth from him. I thought, even though it didn't necessarily translate to better stats, to better results, he did not have a lot around him at South Carolina. He was doing a lot of what he did almost on his own out there. Uh, I know that he has not shot the ball well from three. It did not look particularly good in offseason workouts, but I just can't get out of my mind that if at his size, with his length, if he could ever just stand in the corner, I mean, it's not something that is going to come up in his rookie year. But how many guys that are veterans in the NBA who we now think of as high level corner 3 point shooters, how many of them entered the league unable to shoot threes? It's not something that is out of the realm. If he's got the work ethic, which I have, people I talk to say he has great work ethic. I believe in his ability to at least develop that one shot from the corner and be able to add that offensive value that'll keep him on the floor defensively. What do you got here for the Chicago Bulls?
Well, I have your mock draft picked up, and I agree with your mock draft. I'm going with Derek Queen. I think this is the time. Chicago needs that kind of star upside. They also need to eventually replace Nikola Vucevic. Eventually, that man has to leave. Eventually, and Derek Queen is one of the perfect players in this draft to give them that post production. He can still work from the high post. He can do it a little bit in the low post as well. Um, the shooting is a concern, but again, Brooke Lopez and Bruce Bowen, all those guys have made these players lots of potential money because you know that someone can develop a shot now. That it doesn't always happen, but there's always a thought in your head that, oh, maybe even though this guy can't do this right now, he'll learn how to do it when they have the work ethic. I just like his demeanor, his attitude We know some of the things he said during the tournament, especially after he made the game winner. He's from that town where they have that confidence, and he's going to bring that to the Chicago Bulls, which is a town where you need confidence.
Yeah, I am a fan of Derek Queen's game. I know that it's a controversial style of play because of both the fact that it is very ball dependent. Like there's not a lot of centers left in the league outside of the superstars who just get the ball in their hand and go to work. But that's kind of what Derek Queen can do. He's got a little bit of playmaking to him when he's at the top of the key, and so the threat of him developing an outside shot is something that it's got to be in the back of people's mind. And so, yeah, I do really like the idea of him replacing Vucevic if they move on from him this year. Even if they keep Vucevic, that can't be a long term play. And so I do just really like the idea of Derek Queen coming in, being the future at center because he's going to require a certain style of play. And who better than the Bulls to kind of reshape what you're doing than a team that is kind of in flux? They don't want to go completely away, but they want to reset the roster. I think that's a great fit there. We're going to take a break real quick. We're trying to get through the lottery here, but we've run up against the time break here. So we're going to come back on the other side and finish out the rest of this mock draft right here on Three True Values. Welcome back in as we continue our mock draft special here with Derek Lewis of On Three. We're on the 13th pick, and the Atlanta Hawks are on the clock. And this is where it gets a little bit interesting on what should they do. There's some really talented point guards sitting on the board, but of course they've got Trae Young in place. There's already been reports across the NBA that other teams are calling. They're interested in Trae Young. What would that price be? Um, how does the front office shakeup impact things? Because Landry Fields had started to build things out around Trae Young. Everything that he did, every roster move that he made was about getting the longest, uh, best defensive unit around Trae Young that he could. And so he had Jalen Johnson locked up under contract. They got Dyson Daniels in a trade, a huge acquisition for them, what he was able to turn into. Zachary Risachet, who they picked last year in the draft. They really committed to putting long, just lengthy guys all the way across the board in this Hawks roster. And it seemed like the perfect way to build this team out around Trae Young, but then they get rid of the front office. They bring in a new team. So, does that indicate that they don't want to build out the roster that way? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I think you still stick with Trae Young at least one more year. You try to build this out around him. So, I'm going to go Noah Essengay and say that even though they switch up front offices, they keep the same motto. They just go get these long, active defenders who have offensive upside. And you say, look, you have time to grow into your offense because Trae Young is the offense. He's going to be most of what we're doing on that end of the floor. Essengay can come in. He adds to that group that I just talked about of really good defensive young players who can just contribute on one end of the floor. And that's really mostly what the Hawks need. Now, they do have a pick later in the draft. And I don't know, I don't remember if it's me or you who's going to be making that pick. But if you go Essengay here, I think you pretty much have to go center with that second pick. That'll be an interesting thing to follow, too. If there's a run of centers at some point in the draft, do they have to either trade back up, make sure that they get in that mix, or do they go ahead and take one here to just avoid being in that conversation? We move on to number
Thanks for
14.
putting me in a bind later.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna get my pick in. You can deal with the issue later on. I honestly don't remember if they pick Otter even next, so we'll see. We'll see who has to take on that issue. But at 14, we've got the Spurs again. You're back on the clock. You've got Dylan Harper in the fold. You're probably trading this pick anyways, but if they go ahead and select, what do you think they do here?
Well, I just at this point, just because of all the smoke, I just don't think there's any way that they're going to make this pick. Not any way. I shouldn't say it that definitively, but I don't think they're going to make this pick. I also don't think, with how the board has played out, that they're going to make this pick. I think if they actually have this pick on draft night, they would trade down in this spot.
All right,
Those
so here's what
two.
here's what here's what I want to do. We're not gonna put together a full trade package on the screen, but we're gonna create a trade here. It's
Okay.
a trade that we talked about. just last night, I believe. Uh, it's this idea that if they're going to get Kevin Durant, if the Spurs are going to add Kevin Durant, the 14 pick is probably involved. Whether
Right.
that is a package of Vassell and Barnes, whether it's Vassell, Johnson, and Sohan, whatever that means, it's probably going to include the number 14 pick, which would then put the Suns on the clock here. Now we can talk about the second part of the trade if we want to. We discussed this possibility that a third team is involved, not to offload any of the contracts because the Suns need more of those players, but to an offload one of the slightly cheaper contracts that the Suns have that would then allow them to fill out their roster beyond what they get from the Spurs. So if they get two or three players from the Spurs in the 14 pick, does that mean that they can use that 29th pick to then offload a Cody Martin or somebody who is a probably negative value contract at this point, but with the 29th pick, somebody who has a trade exception is going to take him on, and you're able to get off of that contract, bring in new players, and you move 15 spots up the board. I think that's a pretty solid outcome if you're the Suns in this Kevin Durant trade. Who knows if it requires one more future pick, whatever the case is. I think that's an interesting makeup there of a Kevin Durant trade, though, to the Spurs. So if we are assuming that this is the Suns making this pick, who do you think they go with here?
So if we're assuming that this is the Suns making this pick, which is what I was actually not going to do that. It was funny. I thought I was going to see if you wanted to combine our even odd powers to make the Nets to make a Nets trade ups. But
Oh,
anyway,
okay.
we can do this with the Suns because I was prepared for that as well. And I think at that point, they would have to go with Thomas Sorber
Thomas Sorber. All right. So there,
because you took Carter Bryant so early, like a
yes,
madman. He is no
yes.
longer there for either the Spurs or the Suns, and now they have to go Thomas Sorber.
All right. So if the Suns go center here, I think that that does make some sense. They obviously have to address the center position. They got Nick Richards at the deadline last year, but he can't be the only center on your roster. You've got to have more at that position. And so it does make sense, quite a bit of sense to go this direction, especially if they're going to lose that 29th pick. And I do wonder if this is where kind of the start of a run on centers comes into play. Obviously, we'll make some picks here in a second to see if it plays out that way for us. But if Sorber does move into the lottery, I wonder how that impacts the rest of the draft. We're at the 15th pick. The Oklahoma City Thunder are on the clock. We're outside the lottery, but the Thunder still picking far too high for how good they have been over the last couple of years. They don't really need a whole lot. And so I do wonder what they do with these draft picks. I think, though, if you're sitting at 15 and Cedric Coward is on the board still, I think he is the perfect Oklahoma City Thunder player. I think he fits everything that they want, the dribble, pass, shoot model. He just adds another dog for them in that wing room. You give him time to develop. You say, okay, now we can afford to let somebody go if we have to. If contracts start to get bigger, we start to push that second apron. All right, we can trade away a wing who is making a little bit more money and let Coward slot up into that role. I think that this is just a best case scenario for the Thunder for Cedric Coward to still be here at 15. I know that some mock drafts have him a little bit lower than that. I just don't see him getting past the Thunder. I really do not. I think if you want him, you're going to have to move up into the lottery to get him because the Thunder are here, and that this is just the perfect Thunder pick for them to make. So we move to 16 now, where we've got the Orlando Magic on the clock and still just a stack of point guards on the board. And this is something that, before you make your selection, I do want to point out that there is this kind of block here from pick 10 where you mentioned how could they take a point guard because they've already got Reed Shepard who can't get on the floor. From 10 all the way down through 15, there is no spot for a point guard. I
Correct.
mean, we talked about the Suns trading up. If the Suns trade up, I think that that opens the door that maybe, just maybe, they think it's valuable enough, especially if somebody is way higher up on their board, that they would go point guard because the Beal experiment next to Booker didn't really work out. So I mean, that
I did
just,
think about that. I did think about that for them, but I ultimately I was like, it had to be a
right.
center.
No, I think center is the more important position to them right now in the short term because you've got, look, there's more point guards out there in free agency who will sign for the minimum, who will take a prove it deal, whatever the case is, than there are centers. So I think center was the way to go there. I just wonder if they are a high on Fears guy, if they think Fears is a top 5 talent in this draft, they probably go ahead and make that pick. But now we get to 16 where yes, there is a lot of point guard talent in this draft, but nobody from 10 to 15 needed point guard in any kind of way. And if you want to get into it a little bit more, I think from probably like 8 and 9, they probably don't need a point guard either. So it's a really interesting draft for these point guards who they've all got one thing that they do extremely well, and they've all got some flaws that you go, all right, so they're not a home run top 10 pick. Once you're not a home run top 10 pick at point guard, you're going to slide
Tough.
down this board. This is the first spot where point guard is a definite need, but it's also not the only need that they have. So, with that kind of preface, I'll hand the floor back to you as you make your pick at 16.
Yeah, there's just a lot of ways I could do this. Even with again, I have your mock pulled up, your last mock, and they have you have Walter Clayton in this spot. Now that
Yes.
posing that Jeremiah Fears doesn't fall. This we're in Jeremiah Fears range.
Yes.
Now whoever gets Jeremiah Fears is feeling like they won the draft tonight. But I'm still going away from that, just knowing what the Magic like,
Mm-hmm.
and they like length. They like length. So I'm going Igor Denham because they
All
like
right.
length.
Yeah, Yegor Dimon here is a really interesting pick because it feels very magicy. You're right. They've committed to defense. They love defense. Their offense is atrocious though. I mean,
So do you
it
think
was bad.
maybe I should, because the other thing I was thinking here, I wasn't thinking Walter Clayton. The other thing I was thinking was maybe Jace Richardson here because of the offense.
So with Jace, my concern would be if you're relying on him as an offensive hub, I think that you're doing it wrong. I think he is best suited as a cog, somebody who you don't even notice on the floor, and you look up at the box score and he's got 8 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, a steal, and he's a +8. I think that's what Jace Richardson is. I don't think he's somebody you want to be a hub that you're relying on to get buckets because he is a smaller guy and there's enough holes in his offensive game that I think if NBA teams game plan for him, if they're able to take one of their best perimeter defenders and put him on Jace Richardson, I think they're going to erase him. I think they're just going to take him out of the game. So Yegor here, I like it because he's going to get Franz involved. He's going to get Paolo involved. My concern would be you still just have no one who can shoot. And I don't know that, you talked about Fears as the other option that you were looking at here. Fears isn't a shooter either.
Yeah.
Now he's got a little bit more downhill, but how downhill is he going to get when Franz and Paolo are taking up that space as well? They are really in a tough spot. That's why I went Walter Clayton because I think while Walter Clayton has a drastic floor, I
Yeah.
think he's also got a ceiling as that scoring point guard that they need. Where if you can kind of take the focus away from him a little bit, I think he can develop into one of these scoring guards that we see across the NBA. But I do like the idea. If you go Yegor, maybe you swing a trade outside of the draft. Maybe you go get an Anthony Simons, somebody like that who's going to be a bucket, and then you've got maybe you have to give up somebody else who you like already on your roster to do that. Yegor comes in and he can fill that role, whatever
Talk,
that
talk,
outgoing
talk,
piece is.
talk- talking about this, even with Jeremiah Fears falling, it just sounds like the Magic shouldn't make this pick because unless the board just falls in such a way where they can get someone who is not currently available with what we
Mm-hmm.
did, it just does not feel like the Magic should make this pick.
Yeah, and I think that's where potentially trading for somebody is definitely in play here. That would bring Yegor Dimon definitely into the picture if this pick, excuse me, is traded. Because I really like the more that I watched him, the more I think he could play off ball. I think he could be a small forward. I look at how successful Denny Avdija was in a role as kind of a facilitator, but from that 3-4 spot. And I think he could do that. I think he's got the capability to play that way. Maybe that decreases the number of turnovers. Maybe that increases his kind of runway to become a little bit better offensively as he moves through his career. So I do like the pick. It's just the Magic, or they got to find somebody who can score. As we fall to 17 here, I think this is where the run has to stop. I mean, it's got to be Jeremiah Fears.
Yeah.
You look, Mike
Yeah, no, it
Conley
has to be.
is aging. He's got 1 year left on his contract. I know they brought in Dillingham, but I think if Fears is here, you've
That
got to
has to be.
take him. And you look, if you can get Fears and Dillingham in there, they can kind of compete who's going to take over the future of the point guard position. Dillingham, I've always thought is best suited as a 6 man anyway. So if Fierce can come into that starting lineup, play next to Anthony Edwards, I think that does take some of that. We were talking about. He needs maybe somebody to take some pressure off of him as he learns. I think that can happen if he is with the Timberwolves there. Look, and here's the thing with Fears. There's so much upside. But my concern with Fears, and this is where I get so caught up on him, why he has continued to move down my board. I more and more think that the second team that has him, or at least on his second contract, is where you're going to get value. I think that it's going to take him 2 to 3 years to adjust to the NBA. It took him a full college basketball season to adjust to SEC play, to get used to that type of physical defender, that increased level of competition. He struggled throughout. And I know that it says 17.1 points up there on the board. I cannot stress to you how many times I watched full Oklahoma games, and with 5 minutes left in the second half, he had 6 points on 4 free throws and one made basket out of 8 attempts. And then
Yeah,
what would happen is the other team puts in their walk ons, and
yeah.
Oklahoma leaves the starters out there. Oh, boom, boom, boom. 5 straight layups. Okay, now he's got 18 points. And you're like, no, that was not an 18-point performance on 50% shooting. That's not what I just watched. it's
And the thing, Jeremiah Fears to me, and I didn't watch him nearly as much as you did, but I did see him a couple of times, a few times. He plays smaller than he
Mhm.
is, which
Yes.
is a problem, especially if you're not the cold dead on shooter, which is a problem. And then another problem with his game is that he can be very passive, which again is not something you can be when you are the size of Jeremiah Fears. And so it turns the light turns switch turns on and off, kind of what you're speaking to, and that's why I feel like it makes sense for him to fall in this draft because it's
Mhm.
just eventually someone has to take him and bet on the upside, but it's just you're really betting on the upside because the passivity to his game does not serve him for the size that he is.
Yeah, it's a long-term play for sure. Now, and I do want to, this has kind of gone away, but just my last thought on why, look, I like Jeremiah Fears. I like watching him play when he's, clicking. But these people who early in the year tried to put him in this Russell Westbrook, John Morant athlete type of
I I
category,
I just don't. Yeah,
I have
I don't
never
understand it.
once, never seen him crack open that kind of athleticism. I just don't know where it even started. And the Russ thing is, we got to stop comparing people to Russ. Like Scoot Henderson was like, okay, I can kind of like I get it because it's the ripped thing. It's how big he is for and like there's power with his athleticism. Like John Morant was never even Russell Westbrook. Jeremiah Fears is much more the kind of lanky thin guy than he is some just strong built point guard who's getting downhill. So I can't stand when that
Whenever I see the
comparison
Russell
comes up.
Westbrook or the Derrick Rose comp, I'm always just like, all right, we probably lost the plot. This probably
Yes.
isn't.
Yes. All right, we're at number 18 with the Washington Wizards on the board again.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. I was ready for this pick, despite me feeling like I wasn't, and we have manipulated the board once more so that the Wizards can do the funniest thing and draft Nolan Toure.
All right.
French connection. We France all over the place. We continue to France.
Yeah, I
Um,
like I like it. You got Bilal, you've got Alex Sarr, and now you've got Nolan Traore. So you got just a French lineup up and down here. And Traore is somebody who's very similar to Fears. I find it very fascinating though that Traore seems to have taken all of the brunt of the he's a point guard who's going to need time to develop. He's going to have to fill out. He's not going to get you're not going to get value on him for a couple of years. I feel like he's taken the entire brunt of that conversation when I think him and Fears are in a very similar category. And with Traore, the reason that I have him ranked ahead of Fears on my board is because I think that they are very, very similar in what they're dealing with, But with Traore, he's doing it against professional athletes. He's doing it against grown men. He's in one of the top leagues in Europe, and he's going out there and he started to figure it out. Like you go look at how he performed down the final stretch of the regular season into the postseason in Europe. I know not a lot of people are like, tuned into those games, but he started to put together performances and string them together one after another. And I'll just tell you right now, he's shooting over 40% from three over his past, I think it's like 8 or 9 games, which is a sample size, but it's not something that I'm going to completely ignore. So I think he's starting to get a little bit more comfortable. And so I think that his runway to get acclimated to NBA basketball probably going to be 6 months to a year shorter than it's going to be for Jeremiah Fears. And so I've got him just that little bit higher on my board.
And the real thing about it is any point guard you take for the most part, unless they are some super elite prospect, which even the elite prospect, even a Scoot Henderson, like you,
Mm,
it just takes time at the point guard position in
yeah.
the NBA. That's just what it is. So if you feel like you need that position, and especially if you're in this part of the draft, it's time to start betting on some of these type of guys, especially a guy in Nolan Troy who used to be high, always take a flyer on someone who was high, and then they kind of
Mm,
fall in, especially when you're getting into these teams.
yeah. I think to your point there, the furthest, or I guess the most recent point guard who has kind of like hit his potential is Cade Cunningham. And that's only over the last like year and a half that he has really kind of hit where he was supposed to be in the draft on the court in the NBA. So it takes time. We're at 19, and it's my first chance to pick as the Brooklyn Nets. We've got Yakachonis already on this roster, and there's a lot to fill out on this Nets roster. And so I I think you can
I
go
got
so many different ways here.
he's
Uh,
scrolling down. What's happened? What's he doing?
well, I'm looking for my player that I am going to select for them here because I think that they've got so many different options that I just want to run through and make sure I don't miss any of the players here. And I am not. Let's see where am I missing? Okay, there we go. All right, I am going to go Will Riley. I am going to go upside on the wing. He is one of the youngest players in the class. He reclassified to play at Illinois this year. He started to show that he could adjust to that level of basketball towards the back half of the year, became a little bit better offensive force for that team. He can shoot the ball really well. And look, he's a long term play, but he's 6'8. He's a good, solid wing basketball player. And I think he can continue to grow and grow into the type of player that would be extremely valuable for the Nets as they go through this rebuild. So now we move to the Heat at number 20. And I'm curious what you're going to do here because I think the Heat are a fascinating team because they, for the first time in a long time, don't really have a star that's just kind of the center focus of that roster.
Yeah, well, then, and I don't believe they're going to find them at number 20 in the
No,
draft.
probably not. Probably not.
You never know, but it doesn't seem that way. Uh, just again, shouting out your mock, you have Jace Richardson here. That's a very Heat type thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to do a very Heat type thing? I'm wondering, and I'm going no. I'm going to go Liam McNeely.
Liam McNeely. All right.
Uh, I think the versatility, the shooting. I just think Pat Riley, he loves his versatility. He loves his shooting, which again, Jace Richardson also
Mm-hmm.
provides that as well. But a little more length with Liam McNeely, a little more quote unquote pedigree with the Yukon Huskies. I know Michigan State is Tom Izzo,
Mm-hmm.
but still, so a hard nosed, hard coach. You know, Pat Riley's feeling himself after losing Jimmy Butler. He wants people who are coachable, James.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
he wants some coachable guys, and he knows that Liam McNeely has been yelled at a lot by one Dan Hurley, and he's ready to be yelled at by Eric Spoelstra.
This does fit your mold too of the last pick that you were discussing. This is where you pick guys who have kind of fallen a little bit, and there's reasons why, but you can kind of look past them when you're picking at number 20. Liam McNeely is a guy who was in the lottery conversation for quite a while. The inefficiency is what got him. He just did not shoot the ball very efficiently. But one thing that I will say that does fit the Heat culture here is that when he was on the floor, it felt like UConn was a significantly better team. When he was out with injury, they struggled to win games. When he was off the floor, it felt like they would give up runs. He's just a competitor. Like he was going out there, and you knew he might not have it that night. He might not be knocking down shots, but he was going to go out there and he was competing hard the whole time he was on the floor. So it does make sense in that area. Now we go back to the Utah Jazz, who have their second pick of the first round. Already got Trey Johnson in the fold, and I'm going to go a little bit off the beaten path. This is something that has fascinated me if he falls to them. I'm going Danny Wolf to the Utah
Ooh.
Jazz at number 21. I know that kind of interrupts what some of these other teams are trying to do at center, who are going to be picking here in a little bit. So maybe this is somewhere where a team trades up if they know that this is a possibility. But I really like the idea of Walker Kessler, who they have. Maybe they move him, maybe they don't. But if they choose to keep Kessler or move him, I think that Wolf is a really solid option because we've seen Wolf play alongside of a traditional big towering center. He looked really good next to Vlad Golden at Michigan last year. And so if you're going to go with the two big lineup, Kessler down low, Wolf out on the perimeter, I think that that makes sense. If you move Walker Kessler, I think that you bring in Danny Wolf. And is he a rim protector? No, by no means is he a rim protector. Like if you want somebody who's going to block shots, do not draft Danny Wolf. But if you want a guy who is super talented offensively, can work on the perimeter, can provide you a lot of value offensively, and then fit in on defense well enough to stay on the floor, that's what Danny Wolf is. So I do like him as an option for this team as they continue to try to build an identity and find out who they are along their rebuild.
This feels like a version of a Isaiah Hartenstein. Not obviously not the same player, but
Mhm.
someone like that is someone who you're going to need on your team if you're trying to build a championship contender. And he has Hartenstein like values.
That's interesting because one of the teams that he has been linked with is the Oklahoma City Thunder. A lot of people saying he really fits their mold as well of what they like to do. So now we go to the Atlanta Hawks here, who already have Noah Essengay. What are you going to do with them at pick number 22? Remember, they probably need a center.
They do. That's true. And you just took Danny Wolf, which it's mean. It's mean of you. It's very mean of you. This is the point of the draft. I will say that I could see. I'm just going to put my Spurs fan hat on real quick.
Mm-hmm.
If Rasheer Fleming gets past the Hawks, this is the part where I think the Spurs might be like, hey, maybe we need to get back into this and get Rasheer Fleming.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a note for your listeners.
Yes, yes.
um, but in our mock, even though you're right, they do need a center. I am still going to make it to where Rasheer Fleming does not get past this pick. I think the
Okay.
Hawks are going to take Rasheer Fleming.
All right.
Um,
Rasheer Fleming there
I just
at number
think the
22.
I just think the length, the again the versatility, he's just very Hawksy
Mm-hmm.
in that you talk about what they've been building around Trey Young. The thing about what they've been building around Trey Young is yes, it fits around Trey Young, but it fits around anything.
Yes.
When you have this kind
Yes.
of versatility, you can port it over to whatever star you can fit in. Now, finding that star will be hard if you do trade Trey Young, and we're not going to discuss that here. But that's the thing about building this roster is that you're building it in a way that fits whether Trey Young is here or he's not. And we saw that when Trey Young actually missed some games. So I think they continue that trend. Rasheer Fleming's not a center, but he does have that ridiculous wingspan. And so I just think the Hawks, if they have if the centers kind of go the way that they have on our board, I think that they settle for Rasheer Fleming, which is not a bad consolation prize.
Yeah. I think that this is a really interesting fit for the Hawks. And I do wonder if this is how the board falls, if this is how things go, if they're just not interested in Beranger, the French center. Do you go with another power forward here? Because Rasheer Fleming, I know some people have him wing, some people have him center, big, whatever you want to call him. He is a traditional kind of power forward, at least in the modern sense. In that, I think if you're looking for what is he going to be, because is he going to guard on the perimeter? A little bit. He can step out there. He can guard on the perimeter. Is he going to guard on the interior? I mean, he can hold up there. I liken it to how Jay Crowder has fit in for over a decade in the NBA. He's a big body power forward. He can shoot threes when he needs to. Now, Fleming, a better 3 point shooter. He is a very good 3 point shooter. And I think that's where a lot of his value comes, is that he's going to be that power forward who you can rotate up a position, down a position, whatever the case is. But he's also, I mean, he's just so well rounded. You look at, even though it was at St. Joe's, he was playing at the mid major level, everything he did is scalable. He was not asked to be some superstar out there handling the ball and, doing all kinds of just extra stuff. What he did in college is what he's going to do in the NBA. He's going to find his spots. He's going to set screens. He's going to shoot. He's going to slash, and he's going to play a team defense. That's all that he was asked to do. That's all he's going to be asked to do. So I do like this. Maybe they shift Essengay, and I don't think he's a traditional five, but between Okongwu and him, they're about the same size. So if you're okay going undersized, you go for that rim runner, that lob threat there. Could be an interesting way to do things for the Hawks. We move on to the Pacers now. And I'm really fascinated here by what the Pacers would do if the board came down this way. I think they just continue to add guys who fit the mold of do it all. Just go out there and do everything we ask. That's Neat Clifford. I mean, he averaged almost 10 rebounds a game from the wing spot. He does a little bit of everything. He's developed as a shooter throughout his college career. And so this makes a lot of sense for a team that's clearly in its contention window, and has an opportunity here to add another guy who I think projects to be a role player pretty quickly in the NBA.
Yeah, I mean, you said it all. And you know me, I like my versatility. They
Yes,
don't get too
yes.
much more versatile than Neat Clifford there. So,
All right, at pick number 24, we've got the Oklahoma City Thunder.
so I'm gonna be honest because it is the Oklahoma City Thunder, and it feels like we've said this quite a bit. But they don't need then well in some case they need everything. In this case they don't need anything. So it's like what do you what do you give the man who has it all? And so I've decided that we're going to and you're gonna have to help me on this because I'm not as familiar
Yeah,
with his
yeah.
game. But Behringer,
Yes,
is this someone that they can stash,
yes.
or is he coming over for sure?
So Johan Berenger, I think he probably comes over. I would assume that, but I do like the idea of the Thunder adding him because of the trajectory that they are on. You look at the way that their contracts line up. Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren are both going to hit their second contracts in, I believe it's 2 years from now. And so once they hit that, this lineup gets incredibly expensive. Obviously, the way that the Hartenstein contract was structured, and this is front office planning, is such that they can get off of that if they need to. And so once everyone else on that roster, the core guys become expensive, they can move Hartenstein. They can then slot in, if they take a center here, a young guy who has had time to grow, to learn behind what they have. And this is a guy who he's not going to be a stretch the floor guy. He is a rim runner. He is an athlete. He's going to play defense, but there's not much to his game that's going to stretch out the floor. Hartenstein doesn't have that either, though. So I do think that is an interesting fit there that they could go with at that point. Now we get back to the Orlando Magic here, and it just so happens that somebody is still on the board who I think could be their go-to scoring option. And we talked about Dimon potentially being able to play off the ball. So I am going to select Walter Clayton to the Orlando Magic. This is
You did it.
this is my favorite fit in the entire draft. There's no fit that I see on the board better than the Magic getting Walter Clayton. I mean, I think he can go out there and he can score. I think he can play offense in the NBA, and I think they've got so many defenders out there on the floor that, I mean, even if he can't defend at the NBA level, who cares? You can hide him. People
I
hide.
love
Almost every lineup in the NBA has one guy being hid on the court at some point. So I love the Walter Clayton pick here for the Orlando Magic.
I love that you're like Derek won't do what's right, so I'll do what's right.
I'm just gonna correct the actions here.
Yeah, I like Walter Clayton Jr. Just a big game player. It's just the archetype for me.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
archetype is always something that I struggle with. It's one that I do not trust. Walter Clayton Jr. somewhat um, overcomes that because
Yeah.
of just his shot making and his big play ability. But still, it's just hard for me, as you saw, to ever just be like, oh, I'm going to trust this. So, but I understand what you're talking about and what your process is on that, and it makes complete sense. So, we both got what we wanted.
Yeah. And now we both get to pick for the Brooklyn Nets. So we go back to back here.
Great. My favorite thing to do is pick for the Brooklyn Nets. So good. I'm just literally going to carbon copy what you have on your mock and pick bin. I need your help.
Saraf.
Saraf.
Ben Saraf from Israel. Very ball dominant guard. He's got some good size. Some people compared him way too early to Manu Ginobili, but he does have that kind
Oh,
of
then I don't like this
downhill
pick. I don't want
slow
this.
step. Yeah, yeah. He's got some of that in his game. I can see where the comparisons come from, but he's a guy who's going to have to improve his 3 point efficiency if he's going to have a big role in the NBA, if he's going to become uh, somebody who outperforms where he was drafted. And so now we look at what we've already been able to accomplish for the Brooklyn Nets here. And I think I'm going to go Noah Pinda. I'm going to go Noah Pinda. Go back to that European route. This is a big bodied wing. He's going to play defense. Now, he gambles. He will gamble on defense, but it's paid off all this year. So I think on a Nets team that is going to be learning together, they're all going to be figuring out how to play together. I think he is a very good fit there. Now we get to the Boston Celtics, who are going to overhaul their roster quite a bit here. So they've got
And
some options to go through.
and that's why I think I for Boston I like Tyrese Proctor for them.
All right.
Because there's in the air that a Derek White might get moved. I think he
Yes.
slots into that kind of role perfectly. Tyrese Proctor does a lot of things well. He's lengthy, he's long, he can set you up. He just does. He's very Derek
Yeah.
White, and he has that kind of pedigree. So I'm going Tyrese Proctor.
Yeah, he did. He continued to grow throughout his time at Duke too. He became a better shooter, worked on the ball, off the ball. He gives you a lot of versatility. Now we get to this Phoenix Suns pick, which we discussed the potential for it being traded, but we're going to go ahead and stick with it being the Suns here. Because, of course, even in that structure that we came up with, they don't have to make a trade based on what we said. So I'm going to just go. This is so far, like he has just continued to slip. I think I've
Oh
got to
wow,
go Jace Richardson here.
I didn't even realize he was still here, but
Right.
it makes sense based on what we did.
And it's just, based on he's a little bit smaller guard. He's not that flashy. I mean, I already said earlier when we were discussing whether we should pick him, he's not suited to be this big loud performer. He's going to be the quiet guy who slips under the radar. He slipped under the radar here in our mock, but I think going to the Suns is somewhere that he could fit in quite well, being able to just provide that help to Devin Booker, to whoever else they have on this roster. And
So we
now we
almost
get
gave
to
him
the
to him at
last.
14, and now he's back here at
Right.
29.
Exactly. I mean, there's all kinds of range for Richardson in this draft. And we get to the final pick here. We've got the Los Angeles Clippers on the board, pick number 30. I apologize for anyone who's watching this on YouTube, because apparently Fanspo has not removed all of the players who have withdrawn. So the top of this board is not what the actual top of the board is in the draft at this moment.
Wow, get it together, fans, bro. Um, I once again, for all your fans who want to know how to build around Wemby, I once again put you on alert that this is where the Spurs might want to think about trading back in, but we're not obviously going to do that here. I like this, and it would be for this player who I'm about to pick for the Clippers, which is Maxim.
Reno.
Thank you. Anytime I need last name help, because I only read these names. Just for people who are
Yes.
like, why does this guy not know? I only read these names. I do not hear them. So that's why I'm so bad at the last names.
Yes,
But
that is the challenge.
I do know who he is, and I do know what he does, and he does a lot of good things. Perfect for the Spurs, but perfect for the Clippers as well. Perfect for any team who needs a big with the versatility, can pass it, can shoot it. Just very versatile. The defense is there as well. And so I think that's the Clippers obviously like that. Any team likes that, but you could also see the Clippers, if they don't want to pay that slot, maybe move down and get some extra picks for it as well.
Yeah, I do love the Maxime Reynaud fit here. I am a big proponent of the Clippers going out and getting Zubac a backup, somebody who they can kind of rely on, because we saw how good Zubac was this year. And I think you want to maximize that by allowing him to take a couple breaks throughout the game. Make sure that he's at full potential the whole time that he's out on the court. So you bring in a Reynaud, who is, by the way, just to close out the show here, an incredible story. Went from walk on to one of the best players in Stanford basketball history. Just incredible his path that he took to get to potential first round draft pick in the NBA. Want to thank everybody for tuning in, for listening to this NBA mock draft special. We will have more draft content next week. I want to thank Derek once again for coming on the show, for joining me, helping me get through this. Could not do it without him. We will be back right here on Three True Values as soon as we can. I believe next week, next Thursday, we'll have another show coming right here for you.